The football has finally begun. The goals are being scored. The stadiums are filling up. Millions of fans around the world are watching the biggest World Cup ever created. On the surface, this is exactly what FIFA wanted, a month-long celebration of football played across North America on an unprecedented scale. But just days into the tournament, another story refuses to disappear. A referee sent home before he could officiate, a qualified nation struggling to get supporters into stadiums, travel restrictions, ticket controversies, visa disputes, and a growing sense that the football itself is fighting for attention, because the biggest challenge facing World Cup 2026 isn't happening on the pitch, it's happening around it. And while the matches have already begun, the questions surrounding this tournament are only getting louder. FIFA believed kickoff would end the controversy. Instead, it may have exposed how deep the problems really go. The story that captured global attention wasn't about a player, it wasn't about a manager, it was about a referee. For years, Omar Abdulkadir Artan had worked toward a moment that few people from his country had ever imagined possible. Becoming the first Somali referee, selected for a men's World Cup, wasn't just a personal achievement, it represented progress. It represented hope. It represented football's promise that talent could emerge from anywhere. Then came Miami Airport. Instead of arriving to prepare for the biggest tournament of his life, Artan was denied entry and sent home. FIFA could do nothing. The host nation made the decision. The World Cup would begin without him. On paper, it was an immigration story. In reality, it became something much larger, because the World Cup sells itself as the most global event on Earth. A tournament where every corner of the football world belongs. Yet less than a day before kickoff, one of its own officials found himself locked out of the event he had earned the right to attend. The symbolism was impossible to ignore, and football noticed. But then things got worse, because only hours later another controversy emerged, this time involving an entire national team. Iran's Football Federation claimed that its allocation of supporter tickets had effectively disappeared. For decades, one of the most sacred traditions of the World Cup has been supporters following their nation across the globe. They save money for years. They organize travel plans. They build memories that last generations. Now, imagine qualifying for the biggest tournament in football and being unable to offer your most loyal supporters a single ticket. Whether the dispute was administrative, political, or logistical almost became secondary. The damage was already done. Once again, the story wasn't football, it was access, restrictions, uncertainty, and suddenly FIFA found itself confronting a dangerous perception. Not that the tournament was failing, but that parts of the football world were no longer being welcomed equally into it. Then came the words that spread across football media, World Cup of Chaos. When Ian Wright publicly used the phrase, it resonated because it captured something many supporters had already been feeling: expensive tickets, expensive accommodation, travel restrictions, visa concerns, security concerns. Every few days another headline emerged. None of them alone threatened the tournament. Together, they created a completely different atmosphere. FIFA had spent years preparing for a celebration, yet as kickoff approached, conversation increasingly centered on everything happening outside the stadiums. This is the danger of narrative momentum. Once enough stories point in the same direction, perception becomes reality. The World Cup was no longer being judged only by the football it would produce. It was being judged by the experience surrounding it. And for FIFA, that may have become the biggest challenge of all. What FIFA didn't expect was that these stories would begin connecting together in the minds of supporters on their own. Each incident could be explained away: a visa issue, a ticket dispute, a political complication, an unfortunate administrative decision. But football fans rarely experience events in isolation. They experience them as a pattern. And patterns are powerful because once people begin to believe a tournament is surrounded by problems, every new headline reinforces that belief. Over the last year, World Cup 2026 has generated an unusual amount of conversation that has very little to do with football itself. Discussions about travel restrictions, discussions about security concerns, discussions about ticket affordability, discussions about whether ordinary supporters can realistically participate in the tournament they helped make famous. None of this means the World Cup is failing. In fact, commercially, it may become the most successful World Cup ever held. But financial success and public trust are not always the same thing. FIFA's greatest strength has always been the emotional connection people feel toward the World Cup, the belief that for 1 month, football belongs to everyone. Rich or poor, powerful or powerless, large nation or small nation. That belief has survived wars, political conflicts, corruption scandals, and decades of criticism. Yet, on the eve of the largest tournament ever staged, some supporters are beginning to ask whether that promise still feels true, and once trust becomes part of the conversation, it is remarkably difficult to control. Because trust isn't measured in ticket sales, it isn't measured in television ratings, it isn't measured in sponsorship revenue. It exists entirely in the minds of supporters. And when that trust begins to weaken, even the biggest sporting event on earth can start facing questions that money alone cannot answer. And yet, in the middle of all the noise, football delivered a reminder of why people still care. Marcelo Bielsa arrived at the World Cup with Uruguay, while administrators argued, journalists debated, and institutions defended themselves. Bielsa was doing what he has always done, studying football, obsessing over details, and preparing for the next match. His presence created a striking contrast. On one side, a tournament surrounded by controversy, on the other, the pure beauty of the game itself. Bielsa represented the version of football people fall in love with, the tactical battles, the unpredictability, the obsession, the magic. It was a reminder that beneath all the politics and all the headlines, the sport itself remained extraordinary. And perhaps that is why the World Cup continues to survive every crisis thrown at it. And this changed everything. Because the final day before World Cup 2026 exposed two completely different realities existing at the same time. One reality belonged to administrators, immigration systems, ticket disputes, political tensions, and endless controversy. The other belonged to football itself, to players preparing for the biggest stage of their lives, to coaches chasing history, to fans dreaming about unforgettable moments. FIFA can manage press conferences. It can release statements. It can defend decisions. But there is one thing it cannot control: the way people remember a tournament. Years from now, nobody will care about promotional slogans. Nobody will remember marketing campaigns. What people will remember is the feeling, the atmosphere, the stories, the moments that define the competition. The nightmare scenario for FIFA isn't empty seats. It isn't criticism. It isn't even controversy. The nightmare is that the biggest World Cup ever created becomes remembered for everything around football rather than football itself. Tomorrow, the tournament begins. Tomorrow, the noise disappears and the football takes over. But on the eve of kickoff, one question remains unanswered. Can the game save the World Cup from the stories surrounding it?